well as my spiritual home, which is Light of the World Christian Church. Today, what I want to talk to you all about is prophetic hope. The word prophetic refers to that which is based in prophecy, often referring toward the future or at least aspects of the unknown. Hope is something we are all familiar with, as we hope for many things on a daily basis. We hope to get a job. We hope to get a car. We hope that the people who said they would join us for dinner actually show up. Hope is a kind of expectation or desire. However, our typical hopes are things that we have some level of confidence in happening, based on our experiences, our beliefs, and our trust in certain people, systems, and norms. You can do the second slide. A prophetic hope, then, is a desire for a future that is anchored largely in our belief in its possibility and not necessarily in vast empirical evidence insinuating its probability. Constance Fitzgerald describes prophetic hope as the prayer of no experience. Prophetic hope leaves room for possibilities that we have yet to experience, positions we have never been in, and lives we have yet to live. This is why in the canon of liberation theology, many theologians and philosophers think of prophetic hope as a necessary condition for us to move toward freedom. It works as a kind of antithesis or opposite to pessimism and nihilism. Pessimism being the belief that nothing can truly change, and nihilism being the belief that nothing matters or that life is meaningless. As an existentialist, I know that this can cause what we call crises, when the different aspects of our living return to us with answers we don't like or no answers at all. Questions like, what is our purpose? Is there any meaning to our existence? If a truth of our mortality is that just as we perish, so will everything we hold dear, will anything that we create to change this world matter beyond time? If I am such a small thing in this sea of billions of creatures, here for just this vapor of a moment in time, can I make a difference? All of these questions would put anyone into crisis, and my goal today is not to spiral you into crisis. However, it is the beauty and purpose of spaces like these to help you draw a map forward in your lives for addressing, coping, and answering these questions for yourself. And perhaps most importantly, these are the spaces in which we don't just confront these questions for ourselves, but we confront them for the other, the person beside us, the person across town, the person in another state, in another country. Because the answer to this question for you has implications for everyone. You may think I'm exaggerating about this, but take this example. If I believe that I am a singular being, with no obligations to the other person next to me, because my life is finite and meaningless, then I will live in such a fashion. I will treat people how I want to because we all will perish. Time will make the footprints of our decisions slowly disappear like sand in the wind, to the point where the footprint will be unrecognizable. So I can do what I want, especially if the lives we live lack a heaven or hell after this plane of existence. However, if I make meaning like building with bricks of clay, erecting a life that will one day stand like a pyramid, even if one day I am gone, it will have mattered. It will have served a purpose, and it may have helped someone else along the way. This is why I tell my students that the metaphysics of what a human is, or our answers to what we are, and our existential answers to how we shape our existence, then become our ethics and our politics. And together, those things shape our world. You can do the third slide. So prophetic hope is not just wishful thinking. It is the shaping of progress, the designing of new ways to be human. And it is the methodology that helps combat the ills of the world. I describe this through three different dimensions of prophetic hope, which are prophetic rage, believe it or not, prophetic lament or sadness and sorrow, and then prophetic joy. Although we represent many different political ideologies in this room, In one way or another, all of us are probably wishing for a better world. Whether it is our hearts reaching out to the terrors in other countries, or tears for our own domestic issues here in the United States, we all desire a better world. However, any student of history knows that history often repeats itself, and there is nothing new under the sun. Prejudice is as old as Homo sapiens are. Sexism is as old as the sexes themselves. And even in societies where class was not defined neatly enough for there to be classism, we have always had hierarchies. Those who had more, those who had less, those who didn't have enough and suffered and perished because of it. It is easy to say that this is the way of the world. That is the essence of humanity, that we are the darkness. That is not a lie, but it is a kind of surrender. I believe that we are the kinds of creatures capable of more light than darkness, but we must believe that before it can ever become manifest. We have to see the dawn in the middle of the night and then march east until we see the sun. On the fourth slide, Cornel West, in his book, Prophetic Deliverance, thinks about this through the Black Christian tradition. He writes, "For prophetic Christianity, the two inseparable notions of freedom are existential freedom and social freedom. Existential freedom is an effect of the divine gift of grace, which promises to sustain persons through and finally deliver them from the bondage of death, disease, and despair. Social freedom is the aim of Christian political practice, a praxis that flows from the divine gift of grace. Social freedom results from the promotion and actualization of the norms of individuality and democracy. Existential freedom empowers people to fight for social freedom, to realize its political dimension. Existential freedom anticipates history and is ultimately transhistorical, whereas social freedom is thoroughly a matter of worldly human liberation," end quote. The source of existential freedom here is in the Christian notion of God. But whether or not you subscribe to a God in such a way, existential freedom comes from the questions, who and what are we? To ourselves and to one another, and what purpose do we create with the material of our lives? That freedom then facilitates social freedom pursuits. But whether one is monotheistic, believing in one God, polytheistic, believing in multiple gods, agnostic, being ambivalent about the existence of God, or atheist, believing that there are no gods, all still participate in the spiritual practice through the concepts of faith and hope. Prophetic hope begins as belief and then, when properly watered, becomes something declarative and active. Prophetic hope shapes the world through the conscious and unconscious actions of an existentially free person who has decided to find meaning or make meaning where they found none. The next slide says, in the book, Prophetic Rage, A Post-Colonial Theology of Liberation, Johnny Bernard Hill describes prophetic rage as this: the call for renewal and transformation in the quest to resist empire and establish alternative spheres of peace, justice, reconciliation, hope, and redemption in the world. It represents the challenge of establishing a political theology of difference, rooted in the prophetic call for justice and reconciliation in the church and society, end quote. Prophetic rage is a part of the Black liberation tradition, anchoring its insights through the history of Black people across the globe, but imagining a freedom for everyone. The next slide. Now you may say, isn't rage and hope hard to put together? Not so much if you understand rage and anger like Audre Lorde did. In her text, Uses of Anger, she says this: anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification. For it is in this painful process of this translation that we identify who are allies with whom we have great differences, and who are our genuine enemies. Anger is loaded with information and energy. Audre Lorde gives us 3 advantages of anger and rage in this text. Number 1, it clarifies. Not only does it clarify who our allies and enemies are, but it also clarifies the offense itself or the problem itself. We often miss the extent of harm and the effect it leaves behind when we silence our own anger. And as she says in another text, our silence will not protect us. Number 2, it gives focus. She distinguishes anger from hatred, in that hatred is the fury of those who do not share our goals, and its object is death and destruction. But anger is a grief that of distortions between peers, and its object is change. And number 3, it combats fear. It gives us something that our minds can focus on above fear. Though we are afraid, anger can help us act anyway. The next slide. Prophetic rage leads us to action both within ourselves and in the world. In her book, The Ethics of Ambiguity, the existentialist Simone de Beauvoir states, quote, "In order for the universe of revolutionary values to arise, a subjective movement must create them in revolt and hope." Revolt and hope sound like they are incompatible. However, there is no revolutionary change that did not need both. Revolt does not necessarily mean violence. That is what our minds typically go to when we hear words like anger and revolt. Instead, revolt demands change. It is a rejection of the status quo. It is a decision to do something about something. The extent to which we act is usually dictated by the level of and the sustainment of our rage. So rage also brings us toward a future we hope for and prophetically declare into the world. Next, we have prophetic lament, and you could do the next slide. If you think prophetic hope is incompatible with anger, then it really becomes complex with lamentation or sorrow. Emmanuel Katangole, in his book, Born from Lament, The Theology and Politics of Hope in Africa, connects, quote, the loss of lament with the inability to face suffering and embrace negativity in our modern world. The eclipse of lament reflects a frightened, numb denial, a refusal to acknowledge or experience the distortions of life, end quote. We often don't talk about sadness, grief, and mourning as a road to hope. But just as prophetic rage is anger that can push us toward a better future, so is sadness something that can push us toward being hopeful. We have a tendency to block ourselves from fully embracing emotional pain. However, that refusal to feel also leaves us with unanswered questions about the world. How could such travesty happen? How can such natural disasters occur? Why must our world have so much violence, exploitation, violations, suffering, and death? Those negative emotions can lead us to a light of possibility if we allow it to, through prophetic hope. Instead of accepting this world as it is, prophetic hope allows us the opportunity to refuse it and imagine something better. Not forgetting the terrors that have happened, but instead remembering them so that we don't repeat them. We often find ourselves, as Katangole describes, suspended between pessimism and optimism. In the attempt to ensure that we are not let down or disappointed, we refrain from optimism. And to make sure our lamentation doesn't become too much to bear, we avoid pessimism. So we sit in the middle, uninspired but in control. My suggestion for you today is to allow yourself to be sad. Allow yourself to be mad, but let those things always be directed toward hope. You may ask, what is there to be hopeful for when it's raining outside? My response is that hope is not a place or a destination. Hope is conjured, it is manifested, often from nothingness into something. It comes from our existential refusal to exist in what was given to us. It is a paving of a road, not taking a road already traveled. That means tough terrain is in front of the hopeful. Stumbles, falls, and counterproductivity being knocked backwards from progress are all possibilities in this hope. However, it is worth it because of who and what we lament for, because of who and what we get angry over. If we allow ourselves to see injustices for what they are in their fullness, like listening to George Floyd call for his mother and be pushed slowly towards death for 8 minutes, then the anger and the lament from that can fuel us toward a better world. In a world with so much terror, we often get desensitized from devastation. Another plane crash, another natural disaster, another school shooting, another. My message to you today is to let it enrage you, let it sadden you, let it do what it does, but don't let it corrupt you, but let it guide you as you imagine a world where insert problem here cannot happen again. But last, and probably most importantly, there's prophetic joy. You could do the next slide. Rage and lament are helpful, but there is another side we need, and that is prophetic joy. Lindsay Stewart, who, by the way, was on my dissertation committee, in her book, The Politics of Black Joy, Zora Neale Hurston and Neo-Abolitionism, thinks about joy through self-determination and winning within as a different strategy from just resistance. She writes this: while resistance foregrounds an oppositional relationship or relation between oppressed and oppressors, joy foregrounds a flourishing relation of the self to the self. While resistance can, as Angela Davis argues, enable us to switch positions in the game of recognition, refusal is a rejection of the game altogether, end quote. We don't often think of joy as a possibility of refusal, but in Black liberation theories, this is an important method toward freedom. There are some systems in which we must work through to find a solution. There are others that are so diametrically opposed to the freedom we want to see in the world that our only choice is to refuse to engage them. There is a TikTok trend that talks about Black people learning line dances and holding parties during many of the recent events that affect them directly. That is not an ignorance to the injustices. That is a choice to choose oneself and peace in the midst of chaos. Throughout horrors like slavery and all the oppressions before and after it, there has always been songs, dances, and art of joy. How can one be joyful in the midst of travesty? Because one must in order to survive, and because dreaming of a better tomorrow is sometimes the only way we get through today. A prophetic joy would be one that engages in acts of refusal toward conditions and presumptions of the world regarding who we must be, how the world must be, how we must act, etc. Instead, a prophetic joy seeks to conjure freedom from within. And my last slide. Natalie Atoke gives a similar sentiment in her book, Melancholia Africana, where she says, quote, "The oppressed flesh gives birth to an essentially redemptive prophetic speech. The enchained people identify as the chosen people," end quote. Despite their circumstances articulating otherwise, she calls this, quote, "pain that sings the happiness to come," end quote. That is the beauty of the Negro spiritual tradition. There are some songs that are joyous and upbeat because even when it looks like there is no reason to be joyful, we create joy to keep from dying. That is the challenge for you. And when it feels like there is plenty to be angry and sad about, also find space to be joyful. For it is only in the spirit of joy that we can find the strength to continue. It is an existential refusal to be joyful in the worst moments, and it is through joy that we will see a brighter day. Our fight in the world begins with the fight within ourselves. We must find a way to balance rage, lamentation, and joy to stay hopeful. Losing rage makes us docile. Losing lament makes us cold and unempathetic. Losing joy makes us uncentered and at risk of losing ourselves. Together, however, they make us hopeful. Our collective prayer can be that we will prophetically declare the world we wish to have, that we will channel rage toward change, channel lamentation toward empathy, and channel joy toward freedom. So I end this with the Yoruba word that means it is so and it shall be, Ashe.